What is up, YouTube? It's one Nailsy, back with Hometown Commander. Back for another episode of Nailsy Updates, the show where I update my main and test decks for you and talk to you about my process, what I'm playing, what I value, and the things coming along. Today we're talking about Jetmir, Nexus of Revels, my favorite Naya, my favorite Naya deck I've ever built, one of my favorite and most cherished decks that I have in my collection, and a deck I have so much fun playing. This is my Naya tokens deck, and this is a deck I really enjoy. Jetmir has not been updated, I believe, since Ixalan. So we are updating this for Karlov Manor, Fallout, and OTJ. So there's plenty of cards in consideration here. And in fact, Jetmir got the biggest update of any of the main decks and test decks that I have. And the reason is, before we get into the deck, the big goal I had with Jetmir was I wanted to take out every token doubler out of Jetmir, and I wanted to see what can Jetmir do. It's a very mid-range strong deck. Get to 9 and win the game with his ability, which we'll talk about in a second. I wanted to see what Jetmir could do without doublers. So part of the reason that the update for this deck was so big is I took out every single token doubler that I had in the deck and focused on more of what I think this deck excelled at, which we'll talk about as well. And so it led to a little bit bigger of an update than Goreclaw, which also came out today, which only had a couple cards. But Jetmir is a 4-mana 5/4 cat demon that has 3 abilities, and they all can stack depending on how many creatures we control. With 3 or more creatures, we get +1/+0 Vigilance for all of them. 6 or more creatures adds +1/+0 Trample, and 9 creatures adds +1/+0 Double Strike. The magic number to creatures in this deck is 9, giving us +3/+0 Vigilance, Trample, and Double Strike, making even a 1/1 token, a 4/1 with Double Strike and Trample, can be brutal for some decks to deal with. And that's what the goal of this deck is. We either want to make tokens when we attack, using creatures that make them when they attack, or make them when we go to combat. We want to use X spells to make a ton of 1/1s that are going to hit like absolute trucks with Jetmir out. And then we have a ton of fun interaction cards that I don't want to go and kind of separate into particular sections. I just want to talk about some of my favorite cards and why I love this deck so much. And then we'll talk about our adds to the deck. So as far as making tokens on attack go, I think Adeline is the star of that ability. Whenever we attack, Adeline doesn't even need to attack. You're going to make a 1/1 tapped and attacking each player or planeswalker they control. Part of the reason this deck works really well is knowing that, okay, I can have 7 creatures during my main phase, and when I move to combat, some of these abilities are going to get me up to 9, and I'm going to surprise an opponent by being at that threshold, and they don't think I'm there yet. A Nimbicall is one of my favorite new cards, not just for this deck, but other decks as well. Whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures, again, a Nimbicall does not have to attack. You put a counter on her, and then make X/1/1 gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of counters on the Nimbicall. Again, over the course of turns, you're getting more and more gnomes, and believe me, there are no other cards in the deck that make gnomes, to my knowledge, so we're going to always have non-gnome creatures to attack with. Goblin Rebel Master is one of 2 goblins, and we'll show the other one here on the next page with Leech Warboss that give you a 1/1 goblin each turn that has haste and attacks if able, meaning we're always getting at least 1 goblin per turn. And then if they attack, right, then they can get some buffs. Krenko is just going to make a ton of goblins. I think Krenko is particularly dangerous in this deck because it makes tokens equal to its power, meaning that, let's say we get into combat, right, and we attack with Krenko. Let's say it only has, +1/+1 counter on it. Well, a lot of the times in Jetmir, you're moving to combat with 6 or 7 creatures, and the way I built the deck, and you're going to get to 9, 10, 11 on attack or that. So let's say we have 6 or 7 creatures with Jetmir out. Krenko is now rolling up as let's say it was 1 counter on it, so now it's a 4/3. It attacks, puts the counter on itself, makes 5 tokens, or 4 tokens, what have you. Now it clicks up into being a 6/3, 7/4, with now Double Strike and Trample, where now Krenko could be really dangerous in itself, not just the fact that it made tokens. We have Mural to make a bunch of soldier tokens. We don't have a ton of soldiers in the deck, but you do have enough to make it at least somewhat relevant with things like a Nimbicall. But again, the point is it's a soldier, so it's always going to be making at least 1. And if you get multiple turns attacking with Mural, again, Mural is turning into a 5/4, 6/4. You know, with Double Strike and Trample becoming really tough for our opponents to deal with. But I think where my Jetmir deck has excelled, and the thing that I've learned is that X spells are really good because early in the game you can use them to get a small amount, but later in the game you can use them to get a lot of tokens. And there's just a couple of examples of spells I really like. Awaken the Woods is a fun one because not only does it give you tokens, but it also gives you those tokens that are also lands that can tap for mana. Wildfire Awakener gives us a bunch of 1/1 red elemental tokens with whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals a 1 damage target player. That is kind of a non-bow with Jetmir, right? Because at a certain point it's going to give them trample. But I don't think we really care at the end of the day because they're still going to deal damage to our opponents. Pest Infestation is one of my favorites. Dump as much as you want into X. Destroy up to X target artifacts or enchantments, and you still get twice X that amount of pests. So the cool part is you could dump 5 into each X and only destroy 1 artifact, and you're still going to get 10 pests out of it. And so this is a card I really like. If you think about it, as long as you're putting, you're forced to put the same amount into X. So as long as you're picking an even amount, you're basically just getting the total amount you spent between the two X's in tokens, and you can just really use them to commit to the board. I think the thing to remember as we talk about these X spells is not all of them make tokens with haste. But again, we don't need to attack with 9 creatures. We need to get to 9 creatures. And that's, I think, the big distinguishing factor we need to think. Now, Song of Totentanz does give them with haste. The cool part about Totentanz is it gives all of our creatures haste. Meaning if we manage to play this and Jetmir on the same turn, now Jetmir can go attacking. White Sun's Twilight plays 2 roles, a board wipe, and just makes us tokens, which is pretty cool. March of the Multitudes is my favorite card to play on an opponent's turn because we can convoke, use our creatures to help tap to get as many creatures as into X as we can from Multitudes, and maybe come back to our turn with enough creatures needed to take a big swing at somebody. Secure the Way, same thing, we can do it into the speed. And then I like March of the Canonized. This is from that Vampire Precon. It comes in and makes that many vampires with lifelink, which is a great ability in this deck. And I've tried to add as much lifelink as I can because getting that much life back is just going to be brutal for our opponents to deal with, even if they wipe the board. In the beginning of our upkeep, if our devotion to white and black is 7 or greater, so it'll just be white at this point since we have no black in the deck, we can get a Damien, but most of the time we're just bringing this in for those X 1/1s. Well, it was going to be hard to talk about all of these cards in individual categories, so I just want to talk about 6 or 9 cards I really love in the deck and why I think they're really important. First is Bess. Bess is a card that says whenever one or more other creatures with base power and toughness 1/1 into the battlefield, you put a counter on her for each of them. Just 1 on there for every time, 1 or more come in. And then whenever she attacks, each other creature with base power and toughness at 1/1 gets +X till end of turn, where X is the number of counters on her. What's really cool about these 1/1 tokens we're making is even if they get the buff from Jetmir, they're still considered to be base 1/1 tokens, meaning Bess is going to buff them up. I have seen 4/1 tokens with Jetmir out turn into, 8 5s or 9 6s with Double Strike and Trample, which can decimate a board really quickly. And I really like the new Charismatic Conqueror from that same Vampires deck, basically turning this into a blind obedience effect that says, hey, you can bring it in on tap, but you're going to give me a token that's just going to end up being worse for you in the long run. Erois is a card that will protect us a ton because it's going to give all of our creatures menace, making those tokens even harder to chump block, and it's going to prevent them from dying in combat, which is one of the biggest things we have to worry about if we attack before we get to 9 creatures. Queen Alanol is one of my favorite dual threats in the deck because it's a star where star's the number of creatures we control, but it also makes an extra soldier anytime we make 1 or more tokens, meaning that we're going to be really stockpiling those creatures and go wide. Quarter Calling and Clever Concealment are probably 2 of my favorite convoke spells other than Multitudes in the deck because they each do different things. Clever Concealment is one of my favorite protection spells in the deck. Phase your entire board of permanents out, protect your board, and then they either have to kill you or when you phase back in, you're going to have a board full of tokens that are ready to run your opponents down. And then Quarter Calling, again, 5 mana or 6 mana, you can go get things like Adeline or a Nimpakal. 7 mana can get you something like Mural. You have different spots along the curve where you might want to use Quarter Calling, and you can do it at instant speed and convoke your tokens to help you and go get that creature you need to untap with to potentially take a big attack. Eska's Chariot is a card I've used a lot on Arena playing this deck that I finally put into the regular deck. When it comes in, you get 2/2/2 cats. Whenever it attacks, you create a token that's copy of target token you control. So Eska's another great target for having Jetmir out. Maybe let's say you're at 7 or 8 creatures. Well, you crew Chariot, and now it becomes a creature, adding another one to your account. And then when Chariot attacks, you make a token that's copy of another token you control, and bingo, you might just get to that 9 number if you don't have anything else. Feldar Retreat's great because it can either make you the tokens or put a counter on everything and give those creatures vigilance. Packs a hard punch with Jetmir once you get up to 9. And then Rabble Rousing is one of my favorite cards when you get towards the top end of the curve. Because whenever you attack with one or more creatures, you make that many 1/1 citizens, meaning that a board with 4 or 5 creatures with Jetmir could turn into 9 or 10 literally on the spot if your opponent's not paying attention, and it could make a pretty inconspicuous board turn into one dead opponent, in one combat. And I think that's important to talk about, that the goal of the deck is to slightly surprise your opponents if we can. Go to combat, someone may go, why are you full swinging out here? This happens a lot against people who aren't used to the deck. But you're only swinging 2 3/1s at me or 3 3/1s at me. This isn't that dangerous. And I go, no, actually, I'm going to make these tokens on attack. Now they're 4/1s with double strike. You have 40 damage coming at you, 35 damage coming at you, and with trample. And now they're like, oh, okay. That's where the deck excels, and that's what it's trying to do. But let's get into our updates. And I was really excited. I added definitely some power to the deck with the first card in Gyrd, Mirror of the Wilds. This is, of course, a new Naya Tokens Commander, one I covered on the channel this week. But what I like about Gyrd is specifically 2 things. One, Jetmir doesn't have to attack for you to get its ability, and nor do a lot of the other creatures in the deck that I have that have, beginning of combat or attacking abilities. And so Gyrd just allows them to make more tokens. Make more tokens that can come in this turn and make towards our count. 4th Orlingas is probably a card I should have added in a long time ago. It's very rare you get an X token spell that makes anything greater than 1/1s, and 4th Orlingas actually makes 2/2s with trample and haste. Again, it's okay because we still have Jetmir to give us trample and double strike, but again, it's a great rate to get tokens, and I think it's well worth the cost. Sovereign Akanekahau is probably one of the cards that I can't believe I didn't add when LCI came out, because the more that I read this card, the more that I love it. Whenever it attacks, for each creature you control, the base with power greater than its base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature, go to its difference. What this is basically going to do is take all of our 4/1 tokens, turn them into 7/4s now with double strike and trample, and that could mean the entire board being dead, the entire table being dead if they're not careful. Yes, this has to attack, but hey, it has a word too, so at least that's going to be hard to remove and allow us to get into more scenarios. Tempt with Vengeance is a card I had in before, and I decided to bring back in because you make X 1/1s with haste, so they can definitely get attacky this turn. Your opponents can make tokens, but if they do, you get them. And what I like about that is you're more than welcome to make the 1/1s if you want to. You're just giving me 4/1s with double strike and trample, so take as many as you want. Jetmir will happily take it. War Leader's Call is a card that as soon as I saw it, I said I was in. The other thing I did with this deck was, at this update, was took out my package of Impact Tremors and Perforos to actually put in my Ovika deck, which we'll talk about in a week or two. And so War Leader's Call fits really nice because it gives me that Impact Tremor style ability back, but also a flat +1/+1 again, now making those creatures 5/2s with Jetmir with double strike and trample. Indulge, very similar ability on the top half to Rabble Rousing, but on the back half can get us a bunch of treasures for how many creatures that connected this turn. Indulge, again, can out of nowhere turn us into a really fun game, because remember, they come in tapped and attacking, meaning they come in hopefully as 4/1s that can really mess with our opponents. Flowering of the White Tree replaced a go wide enchantment that just a regular +1/+1 enchantment that I had, because it can give our legendary creatures +2/+1 and ward 1, protecting Jetmir a little bit, protecting Adeline a little bit. And for 2 white, I think it's well worth the cost. Roar Resistance in here to give our creature tokens haste, because more often than not, we want the tokens to have haste more than we want regular creatures. But we'll talk about some other ways to give our whole board haste in other cards. And then Xenagos the Reveler is a card I've gone back and forth on many times, but with getting rid of the doublers, I really wanted to bring this back in. The 0 ability can just give us a 2/2 satyr with haste, But his +1 is what I really care about. At X mana in any combinations of red or green, where X is the number of creatures you control, this gets really good so that we can use this to either cast a big X spell and Jetmir in the same turn, or, you know, maybe I think the absolute magical Christmas land would be able to cast 4 Orlingas and Jetmir in the same turn and just take a massive attack. But again, I think it's well worth it, and at minimum you get that token every turn. Well, I say with all the brews that I make, and I mean it even with these decks, no deck's ever complete, and even with all these updates, there's still cards that I wanted to put in, but I didn't. Inspiring Leader is probably the one of these 3 that I want to put back in the most, giving that buff, making those tokens 6/3s instead of 4/1s as long as Jetmir's out. Determined Iteration makes a ton of sense, getting a token, a copy of a token you control, and potentially getting to that 9 pretty easy. And then Delina just makes a ton of sense. I think there's a magical Christmas land where you attack with Delina and make multiple copies of Jetmir. And, I mean, go even further into ending a game on the spot. I think that's why I'd want it in the deck, is just to make copies of Jetmir. The reason I can't use it to make copies of things like Adeline or anything like that, effectively it is on the attack trigger, so the copies wouldn't come in and get their abilities. But because the copies are non-legendary, that means that if you even made just one more Jetmir, that's an extra +3/+0, and that's just gonna, I mean, be brutal for any of the opponents that we have. I mean, I want Delina back in the deck so bad, but the problem, like we talked about with Jetmir in the other video I'm releasing today, is what do you cut? What do I cut for Delina? I feel like I have run into the exact same problem of what do I cut for it, and I'm not sure. And that's what I'm hoping maybe in testing I can figure out. Does another creature in the deck, you know, come out and we try Delina again? But let me know, what do you think of Jetmir down in the comment section below. The deck list is going to be down in the description. Again, this is tied for my favorite deck I have built currently right now with Surrak and Goreclaw. I love both of these decks, and I'm happy to play them anytime I can. The playgroup doesn't always love me playing them, but I love playing them, and I will catch you guys next time.